Brian is in Cooperstown, good enough to get up early and be with us, despite the fact he's got his own show to worry about later on. MLB Now will be live from Cooperstown as well. BK, we visited with you earlier and talked a lot about Henry Aaron, and you're coming to us from the Henry Aaron display in Cooperstown. Among the legends lost in this terrible run we've had of Hall of Famers passing are two players that were so important to the game that we kind of lost sight because there was always a next guy to eulogize. And it's hard to imagine Joe Morgan being gone. It's hard to imagine Al Kaline being gone. The impact that these guys had on the game and the culture of baseball is without measure.
Right. No, it's an excellent point. You could do, a whole day of coverage on any of these Hall of Famers who have passed on recently. And you're right. Joe Morgan was a big figure. And he even, Joe Morgan was one of the greatest players in the history of baseball. And I mean, you can say that about all the Hall of Famers, but I mean upper echelon, and in fact, probably the best second baseman in the history of the game. Of the modern game, there's no question. Rogers Hornsby was in the 1920s. It was a little easier to dominate back then, and the position was different. It was more of a slugging position. But as far as the modern game of baseball with modern second basemen, Joe Morgan was the best player in the history of the game at second base. And right, he also, when he was a broadcaster and doing Sunday Night Baseball, he was also on the board of directors for the Hall of Fame. He was very influential. He really, Harold, hated Moneyball. And we used to have like these baseball arguments all the time. But people would say, I know there were, on my radio show at the time, I would have Joe on a regular basis. And people would say, oh boy, he's not going to like you and what you're saying. And I said, no. You can have a great baseball conversation with Joe Morgan. For some reason, he didn't like the sabermetrics of it. He didn't like the money ball of it. I guess he felt like it was encroaching on his territory. But he was a brilliant baseball mind, of course. And you could have a great baseball conversation with him. And Harold, he used to call me after MLB Now shows and say, here's what you got wrong. And he would just start to, I'd get a voicemail. And so I'd call him back up and say, Joe, what is it? And we'd talk for hours. And great baseball conversations. And I had enormous respect for Joe. And it ended up, we were talking the same language. It's like you and me. We talk the same language. We come at it from a different way. But, Joe, a brilliant baseball mind. And Harold's such an influential man, as Matt said. Yeah, no, I can't believe he's not here. It's not possible. He was such a powerful figure.
Matt was going to say something, but I'm going to jump in real quick, too, because you kept coming back to me. Absolutely. The other thing, too, Brian, if you can just touch on this, is Joe's impact on the Hall, who all came in, what they needed to do for ceremonies, making sure guys came back for ceremony. His impact in the Hall amongst those greats was impactful, was powerful too.
There's no question that, he was, as a member of the board of directors, he had a lot of impact and influence among what was happening at the Hall of Fame as far as Veterans Committee, the shape of the Hall of Fame. He made his case well known, his displeasure with guys getting voted in who had ties to performance-enhancing drugs. He was never afraid to be outspoken. And along those lines, you're right, he was one of the old guard, along with Johnny Bench, even though for many years they weren't that old. They were kind of took this upon themselves. They had seen through the years that, Ted Williams kind of ran things for a while at the Hall of Fame because he had this, kind of senior leadership position. So when they had their dinners or when they had to vote on something or in convincing people to come back that it was important for baseball, they kind of took that upon themselves and they kind of took that leadership position. I wanted to throw something else, too, in on Al Kaline. Matt mentioned Al Kaline there, and I have these baseball arguments with a lot of these Hall of Famers now, and have great baseball conversations with Dennis Eckersley all the time. And also, Wade Boggs and Randy Johnson are the biggest ones, where, Randy's up there looking down on me saying, how can you compare me to Walter Johnson? I'm like, no, Randy, I can really do it. And it's, but we have these back and forth, but it's almost like I'm exchanging ideas with them, and it's just free flowing, and, we're all about the same age, the three of us. But when Al Kaline came to me, and it was over at the Otesaga, the Grand Hotel on the lake here, and I'm having lunch with my family, and Al Kaline comes over, and he starts a baseball conversation. And he starts talking about what I talk about on the show, and he starts, angling it towards sabermetrics and analytics. And I'm thinking, as he's talking to me, I'm thinking, Al Kaline's having a baseball conversation with me. And it's like what Chuck D said on your show here like last week or the week before. Al Kaline isn't some peer that I'm talking baseball with like Randy Johnson. Al Kaline is a monument. Al Kaline is an icon. Al Kaline is my baseball card, right? That's what Chuck D said. These are my baseball cards. So I sat there. It was like a surreal experience thinking, I'm having a baseball conversation with Al Kaline. This is incredible. And he was such a classy gentleman. He was such just the epitome of dignity and class wherever you saw him. And so, Harold, you'd be proud to know I bit my tongue. If I disagreed with something Al Kaline said, I was like, that's interesting, Al. I hadn't thought of that because I'm not going to argue with Al Kaline. What am I doing? And so those are just some of the things that flood my mind as I'm back here in Cooperstown today.
Yeah. Hey, BK, it strikes me in the brief time we have left with you this morning, you talked about guys like Joe Morgan who were kind of custodians to the brand, right? Gatekeepers, if you will. I know he and Tom Seaver, very outspoken, and there's this legendary dinner that we hear about every year. All the active Hall of Famers get together in advance of induction weekend, and they talk about the business of the building. I'm wondering now, because of these guys passing, who is that senior kind of socio-emotional leader of the group? I mean, is it a Jim Palmer type? Is it, I don't know who's around that wants to do that kind of work.
Well, it happens within that group itself, and it is a very tight-knit fraternity because they see each other here every year. And even though you see people, you might see them at ballparks and different places, and these guys can see each other on, whatever circuit there is, if it's golf, if it's charitable events, foundation events, they do an enormous amount as well for each other's charities. But here is where they all meet, where their families are with them because the Hall of Fame treats their families beautifully. It's a beautiful setting, and they all congregate. It's that rare air. So within that culture, it has to emerge within there. Johnny Bench, I believe, is kind of gotten to that point where he seems to be the person who will round people up. He's the person who will take someone aside and talk to them about their speech and tell them, hey, don't be nervous, or don't go too long, or things like that. So I think it takes care of itself, but you're right, where Johnny is still kind of in that position. Probably, again, I mentioned this yesterday, at one point, Hank Aaron was the young guy in the Hall of Fame, and Ted Williams and Stan Musial and Yogi Berra were the older guys. Now these guys who are the younger Hall of Famers, if it's Dennis Eckersley or George Brett, they become part of the older group, and time continues in that way.
Well, we could go on about this kind of stuff forever, BK. Thanks for coming on with us today, and I know we're going to have you on tomorrow. MLB Now is live there, and again, the big announcement show starting at 3 Eastern on MLB Network tomorrow. Brian kind of orchestrating all the coverage live from Cooperstown. BK, thanks again.
Thanks, guys.